There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello BookTube, I'm Sean the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel. I've lowered the camera just enough so you can see my nice new t-shirt. It's nothing particularly Shawnee about it, just that it was $10 from Old Navy and I need new clothes. So there you go. I'm not going to make much fanfare about it. I got another one like it, similar, to debut next Friday, and then I went back on the Old Navy website yesterday and they had some more Sean-like button shirts that were quite, gay and fabulous. So those are coming in the mail next week. So they're like $18 each. I'm out of control. Anyway, that's the end of Blouse Mania for today's Friday reads. Hello, it's a beautiful day, and this is as far as I could get outside the house with the energy level and lack of sleep. I woke up at 4:30 this morning, wide awake, haven't been back to bed. So I'm going to film my Friday reads. I don't know what time it is now, about 7 maybe, and probably have a early morning nap. It's beautifully cool. I think it's about 14 degrees. It's supposed to get up to 28 today, and that's the hottest we've had it here in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, Canada, for several weeks. This is the only spot on Earth, the Great Plains, the Northern Great Plains, that is not obscenely hot. So come one, come all. July last year in Saskatoon was quite hot. It was uncomfortably hot. And this July, it's barely gotten above 20 any day. Until later today, maybe. So I've been enjoying the summer so much, and everybody else is suffering, and I'm actually really worried about what's going on with the intense heat all over the world that may never ever go away. What do I know? But it seems pretty scary to me. So I hope you're all staying cool as best you can, and unless you live in the Great Northern Plains, you're probably really overheated right now. So, do I have any personal news? I have a wee update on Mom and Dad's dog that was Rico. They have changed the name. Greg left a comment saying that he changed his dog's name when it was several years old, like more than a year old. And even before then, Mom and Dad decided, we really don't like the name Rico. So now their dog is called Charlie, and so far no problems. Although Charlie's a bit unhappy this week because he got fixed and is wearing one of those collars so he doesn't lick himself, and he's not hating the collar as much as the injury, so he'll be much happier in a few days. That's the Charlie update. From now on, his name is Charlie. Much better name for a dog. I had a great video chat with my husband Kenji in Tokyo yesterday, and he's doing well. It was a little bit cooler. It was below 38, like I think it was only 36 degrees Celsius that day. It's been 38 and above for days and days, and he is living, since I left Tokyo, he's been living with his parents in a spare bedroom, or a little bedroom that has no air conditioning. So he's just dying. In Japan, there's no central air. In fact, there's no central heating. It's the same machine that's mounted on the wall, I'll put a picture up, that does heat and air conditioning for one room only, or if you have a more open plan, it will go through all that open space, but mostly it's one room. So he doesn't have an air conditioner in his room. He's got a little fan. I wish he was here enjoying the cool weather with me, but soon enough. And he'll probably get here around Christmas time, and it will definitely be cool weather then. Almost forgot. Here's the week in review.
It's about an artist at the end of his life who, because of cancer treatments, is not able to use his hands the way he used to. And so now he's using photography, and he has a young photographer assist him with creating art by digital manipulation of these photographs. And he's working on a project, which is what we follow him through on this novel, this very short novel, that is inspired by a painting that he fell in love with when he was in his youth. He saw it in Venice. The artist is Gian Domenico Tiepolo. It was painted in the 18th century. and it was called Il Mondo Nuovo, the New World.
It was very interesting reading a profile that was set up in this sort of way. I can't remember the last time I read an author profile where the author welcomes the writer into their home. I mean, I think it makes sense. As you are saying, he is an older man, he's ailing and all of that stuff. So in a lot of ways, it was practical for him to have Baraka come over to his house. But that formed the basis of a lot of the controversy, especially on Kenyan Twitter. You know, how do you have somebody over at your house and then they write something like this became the way it was discussed. And I found actually the way it was talked about almost as interesting, if not more interesting, than the profile itself, which maybe that's what makes for discourse.
Several people recommended to me. I went around asking people, what's your favorite novella? And those that were into them, several mentioned this book, which I haven't read.
All right, I've had an excellent reading week, and the best thing about my reading week is by about Tuesday or Wednesday, I decided, you know what, this week does not have any finishing energy. I didn't want to, didn't feel like, wasn't motivated to push myself to finish any of the books. And I could have finished one or two, but I decided to just listen to myself and realize that I didn't want to finish anything. I just wanted to dabble in a whole bunch of books, and so that's what I've done. So I have a Bale to tell you about, and I have 6 books that I've gotten a ways into that I can talk about for the first time, and then whatever I'm going to start. It's been a really idiosyncratic, very deeply satisfying reading week. All right, let's talk about the Bale. Do you remember Deweython in April? I started this collection of short stories, Rhapsody and Other Stories by Dorothy Edwards, and it took me until now to read 2 stories, and the first one was awful, and then the second one was just a little bit better, and I got a bare start on the third and thought, you know, this is just not good enough to waste my time. This was brought back into print by the Library of Wales, Parthian, and in either its first edition, 1927 or something, yep, or its reprint. Nobody had rated it or reviewed it on Goodreads. I would have been the first, and my review is a Bale review. Yeah, the second story was a little bit better, but not much, and it was about an unhappily married couple who didn't have power in their house, electricity, and they hired somebody that caused sexual havoc in their marriage. The summary is more interesting than the story was. The third one was called The Conquered, and that's the one that I bailed on in the middle of it. The first-person protagonist goes to stay with... It took me a long time to realize it was he. His Welsh aunt on the borders, and there is a enigmatic woman living on the estate. And it just didn't grab me at all, so nothing to rhapsodize about here. All right, I am almost 50 pages into this Malry novel, The Imaginary Lives of James Pōneke by Tina Makereti. And this is for a discussion for a forthcoming episode of the Bookcast Club podcast. That podcast discussion will be taped next weekend, so I've got to really focus on this in the next week. But I'm 3 chapters in, and I'm enjoying it. It is about a Maori orphan, and I'm assuming it's either late 19th century or early 20th century, but there hasn't been any cultural markers that I've noticed, and I don't notice those things very much to put it in time. I would say the one thing that's keeping me a little bit distant from it is that there is an ornateness to this first-person voice, that he was classically trained to learn English, British English, and there's just something about it that's a little bit off-putting. However, other than that, and in spite of that, I'm enjoying it. He is orphaned as a young boy. His mother is murdered, I believe, by settlers. And then his father is murdered by a warring Maori tribe. And he is kind of left to his own devices. And he just kind of goes from a protector to protector. And some of them are settler. Actually, is settler used in New Zealand? Is that just Canadian jargon? I don't know. Anyway, white New Zealanders kind of take him in, and that only gets so far. It's quite a subtle depiction of race. Because he could read English and spoke so eloquently as a young boy, he was kind of an enigma, and he was made to do odd jobs, but also, you know, was that kind of racism that that where, oh, well, you're okay, but the rest of them are terrible type of thing. And then it ends violently. It was a really powerful scene because he was standing there amidst a bunch of white New Zealanders in whatever era this is in the town. Another Malry guy that didn't know anybody was a stranger. Because he saw the Malry boy with the white people, he thought it was safe to come and approach them to ask if he could buy food from them. He had money. And they just ganged up on him and murdered him right in front of the boy. And he just realized it was a horrific awakening for him that, yeah, he had this little special status, but it didn't really mean very much. And he moved on. So where I'm at in the book now, he is traveling with another Malry group that, when they hear his story, think they were probably the group that killed his father, but that they would not hold that against him, and he's traveling with them for a while. One line has already jumped out at me. Each time a home was lost, so also was some flesh sliced from my frame. That's a powerful line. Tina Makereti. I had never heard of her before, but yeah, this is good. Like I say, I wish it wasn't rendered in such old-fashioned English, but it's not preventing me from, and that may evolve, that may change over time, although I don't think so, because he ends up in London, so I'm sure his English got more British. In other words, it got worse. This is a book I haven't yet checked in with y'all about. That was for Pride, June, and now we're almost into August, so I finally read 40 pages. And this is a queer novel by a Polish writer, 11-inch by Michal Witkowski, translated from the Polish by W. Martin. And every time I say the translator's name, I have to exclaim. It just sounds like something's missing, that you would use your first initial only. W. Martin. Like W.H. Martin sounds fine, W.T. Martin, but W. Martin, it just sounds wrong to me. Anyway, it's very beautifully translated. Or the prose is lovely, that much I can say. And this is about queer teen sex workers from Eastern Europe working in Vienna at the opening. I think they go on to Zurich later. It's a first-person narrative, but so far, 40 pages in, the narrator hasn't really made much of an appearance in the story, so it almost feels like third person, because it's been focused on another character, Dianka. Milan is Dianka's real name. 16-year-old blonde with blue eyes and long lashes. And Michal, so I don't know if this is autofiction, I have no idea. At this point, it doesn't matter, is Polish. And he's the narrator, but he hasn't been on in any of the scenes, really. Dianka is from Slovakia. Pronouns in this book are really interesting because I go several pages forgetting that it's not about a young woman, because it's always she, which is gay slang and you know, never mind transgender, but I don't think any of these characters are transgendered. But the pronouns keep throwing me off. That, oh yeah, this is a young queer teenage boy. It's really good. It's so fucked up, the experiences that Dianka is having, and abusive, and her personality is really appealing, and there's something kind of Dickensian going on without sentimentality, so not really Dickensian, but just the depravity that she is having to endure, and it's written really beautifully. The narrator, Michal, who may or may not be a stand-in for the author, is also a young sex worker from Poland, and he is much more worldly and successful. Dianka is kind of, she's passive and hapless and just kind of drifts, and so she gets into big scrapes because she doesn't know how to be a successful sex worker. It's really smutty, it's chaotic, and it's deeply engaging. This will be a Zoom discussion with Bernie of Bookstagram fame sometime next month. Michal is the other character, the narrator. He is 11-inch, so I'll leave it to your imagination as to how he gets that nickname. I used a bunch of adjectives a moment ago to describe it: smutty and chaotic, and that it's really harrowing and you know, even Dickensian in a good way, if that's possible to separate the crappy side of Dickens from what he did do well. But one that I need to add to that's as important, if not more important, or it's threaded through all of those other adjectival strands of this novel is it's really compassionate. I am really excited about how much I'm enjoying this so far. This is Afterlives by Abdulrazak Gurnah, his latest novel, published just before he won the Nobel 2020. And this is for a upcoming Zoom discussion, also in August. I got my reading cut out for me in the next few weeks with Tilly of Tilly Shelves and her mom, Roz. So the three of us are reading it. We're not doing any check-ins. We're just going to hook up on Zoom when we're all finished sometime next month and talk about it. This is set in colonial German East Africa, the part of Africa that eventually became, especially Tanzania, but I think also well, Gurnah himself was born on the island of Zanzibar, and when he was born there, about 75 or 80 years ago, it was a sultanate, but it later became part of Tanzania. But at this time, Tanzania didn't exist, and that whole area was called German East Africa, and it was violently colonized by Germany, and they lost it, I believe, in World War I. I believe that's right. So this is set just before that. While we do meet some German colonials that have a heart, and they help out some of the natives, as they would call it, some of the African characters in the book, or the East Indian immigrants. The horror of the colonial project is really starkly depicted. So far, I have met two main characters, and I think it's the second one who's going to be predominant, but it's interesting. I had to go read some reviews to realize that this novel is actually not set on the island of Zanzibar. Many of Gurnah's works are, but some of them aren't. So this is set on the mainland, somewhere in German East Africa. There's no place names, at least none that I've picked up, and I'm, again, I did page through it to see if I'd missed anything. I don't think so, but it's in German East Africa on the mainland, not on the island, not in Zanzibar. And so far I have met Khalifa, who is of East Indian origin, working in German East Africa for a merchant, and he befriends this other guy who I think is going to end up being the main character just by scanning with eyes half closed the synopsis, which of course I haven't read, Ilyas. And he is a African who runs away from home because it's such an impoverished life at the age of 11, and then he gets stolen by an African soldier working for the German colonial troops. Askari is the name of indigenously African soldiers that worked for the German colonial troops. Schutztrupp Askari. And then he goes from this place to that place. And then he ends up doing well to a certain degree and meets Khalifa, who becomes his best friend, and that's as far as I've got into it. The writing is really dense with a lot of information, and I'm having to Google. It's not only that I'm having to, I'm enjoying Googling all these foreign phrases and the references to uprisings that have been in the recent past, getting a really vivid picture of German East Africa. It's really quite powerful. It is immersive. In what I just finished, Ilyas goes back to his little village after many years, finds out that both of his parents are dead, and that his young sister, who I think his mother was pregnant with her when he ran away 9 years ago, something like that, had been given away to a family down the road, and he goes and picks her up and takes her back to the city. The connection between them is really quite poignant, which is the first kind of positive emotional thing that's happened. It's a really stark story. I'm really enjoying it. I think I'm about to become an Abdulrazak Gurnah fan, because this is starting out to be just fabulously literary, with about a part of the world that I knew almost nothing about, and it's just so rich and literary and post-colonial. It's going to be a fascinating discussion with Tilly and Roz. This one I'm very excited about. True Biz by Sara Nović. I need to get an iron or something to steam that sticker off, which is really bugging me. Sara Nović is deaf, and this is about deaf and hearing characters whose lives revolve around a school for the deaf. And it is an incredibly political novel that is so well done. I just couldn't believe how fascinating the first 60 pages were. This is a buddy read with Heidi of My Reading Life, and we're both captivated by it. The head mistress, the headmaster, the head of the boarding school was raised by deaf parents. She herself is hearing. And so she has that biographical experience, which affects how she teaches. And she is very much against the cochlear implants and thinks that they are very harmful, both on an individual level and on a cultural level. And so deaf culture is something that she prizes, and many of the characters, and I think that the author very much prizes. This is a very opinionated perspective on it, and I'm already won over. One of the other main characters is a young deaf girl, Charlie. She's rebellious, and she was given a cochlear implant. Her hearing parents had that done. It never worked. She could never make her way in a regular school. She could never have conversations or follow enough of what was being said or articulate herself, that it caused her to rebel. And so her parents divorce over it, really. Her dad is more sympathetic that she needs to finally learn sign language and start to get integrated into deaf culture, because trying to force her to be a hearing person was an abject failure and just screwed her up completely. The mother, much less thrilled about this change, and they divorce, and Charlie comes to this deaf school and starts to very belatedly learn sign language. It's so rich, and it's didactic in a way. Well, I can't even use the word didactic because it doesn't feel didactic, but there's so much teaching, there's so much explanation of stuff, including like sign language instructions and a lot of deaf cultural history. Utterly gripping. I can't believe, maybe more people have been talking about this than I'm aware of, because I don't watch a lot of BookTube, but I am completely blown away by the first 60 pages. Wow. Oh my God. Third time's the charm. I've had 2 unsuccessful buddy reads, and when I say unsuccessful buddy reads, I should finish that sentence with Katie, my subscriber who lives in Edmonton and who I met face-to-face when I went to Edmonton a month ago. When I say unsuccessful, I mean I bailed on them. I don't remember what they were. One was a Scottish novel, and the other was a short story collection, which I don't even remember what that was now. And Katie was a little unsure about whether we should even try another one, but we have, and oh my God, this is a completely different ball game. This is the short story collection No One Belongs Here More Than You by Miranda July, a book that I've had. When I look at that price tag, Miyoshi 500, it's 500 yen. I remember exactly where I bought this, in Tokyo, and some Japanese chain bookstore that only had a really tiny English language section. They had a sale of hundreds of English books, all for 500 yen, $5, and I bought so many. This was even before I was on BookTube, and this is one of them. This short story collection has been on my shelf for 7 or 8 years, and it's one of the ones that was on a video that I made in January of this year of books that I had to try in 2023 or on haul. And so I'm slowly making my way through that batch of books. And oh my God, I love this so much. The first 2 stories were incredible. Miranda July is somebody that she's a force of artistic nature. Filmmaker, performing artist, and writer. I don't know anything about her other than that she wrote this book. The protagonists of the first 2 stories are female characters whose grip on reality seems a little tenuous, in a way that didn't seem like she was satirizing the mental illness, or maybe mental illness isn't the right word, but certainly there was a little bit of an issue with being in touch with reality. The first story, The Shared Patio, the woman is living upstairs. Is it an apartment or I think a suite in a house, and the downstairs people are a Korean man, and I think his wife is Caucasian. But the landlord said that the garden outside the downstairs suite was for all the tenants, and that she, our protagonist, on the second floor should avail herself of it. And so she is so neurotic about She times how long the people downstairs are using it, and then she goes down and stays right to the minute, the same amount of time later on when they're not there. And then the story gets really weird. I liked it, but I wasn't really sure how much I liked it. And then this week, we read the second story, The Swim Team, which is really short. It's so short I could read it to you in about 7 minutes. And it's one of the best stories I've read in a long time. It's about a similarly kind of weird... This woman, I think, is younger. And the veracity of the story is completely up for debate. And it's such a touching story. It starts out, she says, she's talking to her ex-boyfriend who she thinks has just dumped her. She's not sure about that because she's not really sure about anything. This boyfriend was asking her lots of questions about when she lived in this small town called Belvedere. There is a Belvedere in California where Miranda July lives, or at least lived, but it's not a small town. There is a smaller town in Michigan called Belvedere. I don't know if there's any connection, but our protagonist is wishing the heck she had answered some of his questions, because maybe he wouldn't have dumped her if that's what happened. And then she tells this story about being in Belvedere a few years ago, however long ago, and she's completely isolated and she has no friends. And then one day, I think she's in the one grocery store in town, and she overhears a bunch of elderly people talking about nothing really, except that she overhears one woman, I think it's the woman, say that she's never learned to swim and she's terrified of the water. And so our protagonist steps forward and offers to give them swimming lessons. There's no swimming pool in town. There's no lake anywhere nearby. They come to her house and she has big bowls, big plastic bowls of, little dog bath size bowls or whatever. Plastic bowls all over the apartment to get them to get used to putting their hands and their feet in water and doing the swimming strokes. And it's the sweetest, weirdest, wackiest, most touching story I have read in a long time. In the wackiness, it reminds me of Denis Johnson's Jesus the Son, which is one of the best short story collections I've ever read, and also so weird and wonderful, it's hard to talk about. This has got a bit of that same vibe, which is definitely a compliment. Here is an obscure one. B.S. Johnson's Christie Malry's Own Double Entry, 1973 British novel, I believe it is. It's B.S. Johnson's last novel. As I said last week, I saw somebody tweet about B.S. Johnson. I'd never heard of him, went down a little bit of a rabbit hole, but I showed my findings to Joe Smith and said, would you be interested in buddy reading something by him? And somewhat hesitantly, she said yes. and so here we are, buddy reading his most well-known novel and his last novel. I am enjoying it. It's weird. Christie Malry is a young accounts clerk, and he has just learned double entry bookkeeping, and that becomes his own personal strategy with dealing with modern capitalism and the way he is oppressed, and any other disrespect he receives from anybody in his world. If somebody does something to him, he must do something to them. Double entry. It's funny, it's inventive. I'm glad it's only 180 pages because I'm sure I'd get tired of it if it was much longer. But there's a certain charm about it, and Joe and I are both enjoying it. Like, I don't know that it's going to be a 5-star read for me. I don't think that I'm going to get emotionally involved, but it's definitely impressive in its own way. There's just the right amount of metafiction. So, for example, his mother dies, and she makes a speech to him just before she dies to say, I have to die because this novel needs to be kept short. So there's those kind of metafictional things that are kind of funny. And then he gets a girlfriend, and she asks him to take all his clothes off, and then she brings out the vacuum cleaner, and plot ensues. It's just crazy and interesting. Joe and I'll finish it up next week. So those are the books that I've gotten far enough into to talk about. And so that's why it's been an interesting reading week. Even though I didn't finish any, I'm starting 3 more. I'm going to start the novella that Barb Howard recommended in our recent chat about novellas. The Snow Goose by Paul Gallico. Gallico, there's the Bear Library copy. He wrote it in 1941. It's Barb Howard's favorite novella, and she said she reread it to prepare for the Zoom chat we had about novellas, and said, yeah, there's some things in it that are dated, but it still holds up. It's set obviously early in the war or just before the war, and there is a snow goose in it, and that's all I really remember. It is with virtual double spacing. It's 58 pages. Look, there's the spacing, so it's going to be a quick read, possibly. Here is another book on that list of books that I have to on-haul if I don't try them in 2023. And this one I bought on a whim somewhere in a used bookstore in Tokyo. Actually, I don't know. I may have bought it in... It's highly likely I bought it in Saskatoon or something and lugged it to Tokyo and paid money to ship it back home. So it's time to give it a try. I have a feeling it might not be as good as its title. The Sex Life of My Aunt by Mavis Cheek. And when I say I have a feeling, it's because it's got a fair 3.5, I forget, but it's, not a really high rating on Goodreads. Mavis Cheek died in the last few weeks, which brought it back into my consciousness that this was on my list. She wrote comic novels tinged with tragedy, and that's all I know about her, and I'm going to give it a try. And this one is about the sex life of the protagonist's aunt. And I did find out on her Wikipedia page today that she had published several novels before this, and she decided to try her hand at autobiography, and that didn't go well, so it became this novel, The Sex Life of My Aunt. Let's see what it's all about. Now, if one of my nieces or nephews wrote The Sex Life of My Uncle, now that would be comic, tinged with tragedy too. And for the book spin that's on Litsy, which is the Litsy version of what Rick McDonnell was doing on BookTube Spin, the second pick or whatever, based on the numbers that were drawn, for me is this novel, Frost in May by Antonia White. And it's about a young woman in the convent where a passionate friendship develops. That sounds pretty lesbian. Antonia White wrote 4 novels that are very, apparently all great. This one is 1933. Then The Lost Traveler, 1950. Oh, quite a gap there. The Sugar House, 1952, and Beyond the Glass, 1954. And that quartet of novels was made into a BBC TV series in the early 80s. This novel has an introduction by Elizabeth Bowen. Well, then it must be a lesbian story. So just give it a try, Sean. All right, that's what I got today. Thanks for watching.